class just let out, and I forgot to press record. So, Joanie, you asked for this, and you asked for a recording of the class meeting, and I goofed up and I just forgot to press record. So I'm going to quickly summarize some of the key things that we talked about. Had a good conversation with Ryan, Cindy, and Audrey, and we talked about interviews. I talked about the difference between method and methodology, and I'll do that here as well. And I talked a little bit about final project questions that have come up recently. One thing that we did talk about that I probably won't mention here is just an IRB project that I'm working on that we just got approval for. I might do something about that in an upcoming video for the class. But so apologies that you're not actually getting the class recording. You're getting the summary, I guess, from me. If you have any questions about this stuff, please let me know. So we talked about interviews a fair bit and how we might use interviews in our projects. And there was a few things that were in the textbook that I didn't think were talked about enough. And we also talked about how the textbook is kind of like going really fast through a lot of things. So a few things that I think they could have slowed down and done a little bit more. One is sampling strategies. How do you recruit participants and do so in a purposeful way and sample, people that are that you could ask about your research project. So I'm going to use Joanie as the example because she asked for this video. So think about invention strategies. How, you could have a project where it's just a convenience sampling. I teach this class, I'm just going to ask my students. That's one method that you can take. I think that there should be something a little bit more than that to say that, no, it's convenient, but it's also these people actually have this unique perspective on my research question that I think is helpful to understand. So it might be something called snowball sampling or purposeful sampling, criteria sampling. These are different ways to go about asking people to participate in a project that isn't just kind of willy-nilly. You're targeting the people that you need to target in order to help you answer the research question. So snowball sampling is where you're talking to somebody about a phenomenon, let's say teachers that are using a very unique invention strategy. Let's say that that's the approach you wanted to take. You could talk to one person and then ask them hey, do you know anybody else that's doing this stuff? They'll say, yeah, go talk to this person. And then you follow up and go ask that person, and so on and so forth. When do you stop doing that? We talked about that a little bit, that it's called saturation, which means that people are repeating things. So you're hearing the same thing. You're getting to you've done your 17th or 18th interview, and you're hearing the same things that you heard in other interviews. That's probably a good sign that it's, we need to start winding down. So that snowball, purposeful sampling, you're choosing people for a specific reason. It might be a reason that's mentioned in the literature review. Another kind of variation on that is criteria sampling, where, maybe it's the literature, maybe it's the people that you have access to, but say, think about invention strategies. I'm going to choose 4 students in my sophomore class and 4 students in my senior class, however that, whatever that works. But you've got some criteria. So 4 students sophomore, 4 students senior, 2 men, 2 women. You have criteria, and again, that criteria is often the literature review helps you determine what those criteria are. So you're going out there and you're asking people with particular criteria to be a part of your study. Other things that we talked about. Another place where you can get data to analyze to help you answer your research question is from memos that you can take, or that you take after an interview or a focus group. So when I do qualitative research and I do interviews, I do this thing, I have a research log, and after an interview I will write about, kind of reflect on what happened during that interview, and think about it in the context of my research question. What am I learning here? What did I gain from this interview? Those notes are also part of your part of your research and can be analyzed as data to help you answer your research questions. So there's the interview data, which is super important, but then there's also your reflections on that interview or that focus group or what have you that you can look to. Something that that has come up recently is the IRB study that we just put through, and the study that we're doing is students that are in a co-requisite English class, like students that would typically take developmental English and then take college writing. They're just taking college writing and they get a little bit of extra support, and we should be doing some things with them to help them get along the way, whether it's tutoring or whether getting them access to different resources on campus, success coaches, things like that. We noticed in the literature, the student that I'm working with, we noticed that that there's a lot of conversation about what students are doing, like why these are really successful and why they really work. But they're talking about things that work, but there's still like a 35% of students that are failing. And it's that failure part that we kind of want to go back and take a look at. Like, why are students, what are students describing as the things that made them struggle in that class? That's what we're looking at. So with that, because we're, talking about struggles, and we're asking students, like, what about, your experience last semester in English 1201, that's the co-rec class, what might have made you struggle? The IRB said, it could have been trauma. It could have been some mental health issues. And I think that there's, like, we mentioned as an option, like, what about mental health? Was this an issue? And they said, because of that, you're asking something that requires a full review, one. And two, you need to know, and students need to know that me, as a faculty member at Joanie State, I'm a mandatory reporter, and that needs to be included in the consent form. So that is something that we talked about, because it's come up recently, thinking about interviews that we'll be doing for this project that I'm working on. We also talked a little bit about reciprocity, and that's the notion that, what is your relationship with your participants? Is it just like they're giving to you and you don't give anything back? If it's a short interview, that's probably fine. Or a survey, that's usually the norm. Can you put them in a raffle for a $25 gift card or something like that? Or if it's an interview participant, can you, find a mini grant somewhere or some funding somewhere to get like $10 gift cards for your participants? Giving back a little bit is that notion of reciprocity. And it doesn't have to be financial. It can be, when I did a project in a writing center, I told students, I will, as a faculty member, I will give you feedback on an essay. Like, I will have a session with you, a tutoring session with you, if you'd like. That was the notion of reciprocity in that instance. The other thing that we talked about was a little bit of, we joked a fair bit in the class tonight. One of the students said something about the class going on and on or something. I wrote it on. It drags on and on. So we talked about pacing yourself, and there's something at the end of the selection that we read for this week that's about like being kind to yourself and doing that self-care thing where you're involved in a long project, whether it's a research project or a research methods class, and do things to take care of yourself and make sure that you're giving yourself some time. I talked a fair bit about the difference between methodology and method, and I talked about this in conjunction with the final project prompt, where I'm asking you to identify additional resources that you might need to consult, if you were going to do this project. And I think looking at the methodology informing your project would be one of those things that you might do, one of those additional things that you might need to consult for this project. So something to talk about, and I'll find it in the prompt, final project prompt. It's the method section. What additional resources and readings about your selected research method that you may need to consult to begin your project? So that prompted me to have a conversation with the class about the difference between methodology and method. Method is what we're learning in this class. What are the tools that you use to conduct research? Methodology is kind of like, what is the philosophy behind the kind of research that you want to conduct? What are the values that are imbued in the research that you try to do. It's more philosophical, it's more theoretical, but it is something that I think everybody could think about if they wanted to do this kind of project. And I'm not saying you need to go out and you need to learn about ethnography or case studies or anything like that, but you might say that, like, based on what little I know about these different research methodologies, these are the one or two that I think that I might need to read up on and might need to learn a little bit more. And I'll give you a resource here in a little bit that you could cite and talk just a little bit about. But here are 5 different methodologies. So a research method is a tool. A methodology is kind of a philosophy or a way of, or some values around research or some areas of emphasis in different kinds of research that folks do. So there's 5. 1, narrative. Narrative methodology focuses on stories. What is the story of somebody that has this experience? What is the narrative arc of somebody that has some kind of experience with that phenomenon that you're taking a look at? So invention strategies, it might be like, what is the story behind students as they go from prompt to submitted assignment? What is that narrative arc? Getting students to describe that. But tell us the story. So interviews would be a tool, would be a method that would definitely be used with a narrative methodology. Phenomenology, the word phenomenon does a lot of work there. It's the focus on lived experiences of a phenomenon. So people the people that you might be studying all have experience. Let's say that you've got some kind of like new curriculum that involves heuristics that you've been talking about that a bit more lately as an invention strategy. I think I'm paraphrasing your project and I hope I'm getting it right. But let's say that you've got this curriculum that has this different kind of invention strategy that involves heuristics, and all your students they go through that. The phenomenology, what is the student experience around that phenomenon? Or it might be that as a phenomenon, but also things like writing anxiety, fear of failure, things like that we see in the classroom. Those are all phenomena that you could use a phenomenology methodology to take a look at. And again, interviews could be used there, focus groups could be used there, observations could be used there. But it's the focus on lived experience with a particular phenomenon. Grounded theory is the third. So we've got narrative, phenomenology, grounded theory. You are developing a theory to describe something that really it's really not described in the literature. So let's say you do a literature review. We talked about Audrey's project with this because there's just a lot of intersections there. It's Christian education, rhetorical studies, rural communities. There's not really anything that she's not really seeing a lot of research that nails all of those. But she's seeing something, presumably in these classes, and she can't quite make heads or tails of it. Grounded theory is perfect for that kind of thing. Because what it does is you go out and do interviews and observations and focus groups, and you learn a lot about like how people are experiencing that thing, and you build a theory, you ground a theory in all that data. So grounded theory could be a project that some folks could use. I don't know, Joanie, if it would be a good fit for you, but it's a good fit for some others. Ethnography, it focuses on a particular cultural group. So let's say the cultural group is a class, a class has a little bit of a culture to it, and you might try to understand what is that culture sharing group, like how do they experience a thing, or how do they, or just like how is invention, like how do students talk about invention in a particular little cultural group, like say like you're working with maybe a particular demographic group in a class, and I'm not sure if that would be pertinent either, but that is another approach. And ethnography is where you're looking at this phenomenon in a particular culture. Case study, there's a clearly defined period of time, location, and a group of people that are experiencing a thing. There's a case, whether it's a lesson, an assignment, a class meeting. a case study would take a look at that individual case and its and what it might tell us about something that you're studying. So I don't know, maybe an assignment where students are trying out a new invention strategy, that could be your case. So I think that there's a few there that you might take a look at that might fit with your project. So in terms of the final project, what might you take a look at? And I'll put a link up to this, or a link to this text in our Blackboard site, but John Cresswell's Qualitative Inquiry and Research Design, Choosing Among 5 Approaches. He talks about each one of these research methodologies and goes into a little bit more detail. So if you were to do, in your final project, you might say, I would need to read a little bit more about John Cresswell based on what I've learned from Dr. Scott and what I've learned a little bit online. I think that these 1 or 2 methodologies might be a good fit, and I think that I would want to read these folks. That's all you need to do, really. You need to be pointed in a direction, more or less, because you're not learning all that you need to learn in order to carry out a research project. So it's like, what else would you need to learn? And there'll be more to add to that list if you decide to do the thesis project. But you kind of get your wheels pointed in the right direction to do that. So we talked a bit about difference between methodology and method, and why they're important, and the importance of having alignment between your methodology, your method, and your research question. You shouldn't be asking something about, getting students that have, I'm sorry, I'm losing it here. It's late. But correlation. So how do we correlate things, or what is the impact on this of this variable on this other variable? Those are quantitative kind of questions. When I hear impact, a lot of it makes me think, you want to do something kind of a little bit more quantitative. Not always, but a lot of times that's what I'm seeing. But if you're asking a question about, like, how do students describe their experience, like a beginning, middle, and end, that's a narrative study. And that kind of question lends itself to a particular methodology. That methodology aligns with a particular set of tools, interviews, probably, focus groups, observations. So things are aligned. I'm not saying you need to have those like lockstep or necessarily, but you do need to make a case. Like, I think that my project does this kind of, I'll use these kind of tools, and here's why I think my research question is a good fit for those kinds of tools. I'm sorry, that was a really long way of answering or telling you something there. So questions about the final project. 1, literature review. There were questions about literature review, how to organize it. The kind of project that we're talking about for the most part in this class is an IMRAD, Introduction, Methods, Results, Analysis, Discussion. So in the introduction, that is usually, there's usually something that's kind of like a literature review. Sometimes it's its own chapter. It was in my dissertation. So there's like an introduction, a literature review, and then a method section. So a literature review, you can think of it as kind of setting up your project. And Ryan, I think he used that term, setup. You're setting up your project. You're showing that you've done your research, that you are asking a question that hasn't really been asked before. And the way that you kind of structure that, you can do the inverted pyramid, where it's like the broader stuff first, and then you're kind of narrowing down to the stuff that is more pertinent to your project. You could also think about, here's where there are agreements, here's where there are disagreements, and my project is situated here. So again, the literature review keeps your project in mind, and it sets up your project. So while you can definitely use research from Dr. Jen Scott's class about heuristics in a literature review for this class, you're going to be appropriating it, reappropriating it, so that it is setting up a project that is probably pretty unique from and apart from what you're doing in Dr. Jen Scott's class. We also talked a little bit about how you set up a method section, and it's chronological. I will begin here, and then I will do this. And I emphasize that it is a work of fiction. It is something that you're kind of making up, because things will change, and you'll have to scrap your plans here and there. But here are my plans from here's how I'm going to recruit participants. Here's how I'm going to collect data from these participants. Here's what I'm going to do with that data. Here's how I'm going to protect the rights of participants while I'm collecting that data. Here's how I'm going to analyze it. And here's how I'm going to report it out. That is all the work of a method section. And again, it lends itself to that kind of chronological thing. So if you think about what a literature review does, it sets up the methods, because in an MRAD study, it's usually literature review and then methods. So it's like broader topic, narrow topic, your research question. Method section starts talking about how are you going to go about answering that research question that you introduced us to. And that method section is also an opportunity to talk. You should be talking about why that approach to answering your research question is the right approach to take, why these tools that you're going to use are the right tools to use. So, talked a little bit about method section, talked about literature review, we talked a little bit about IRB proposals. I think most folks are on board with that. The one hiccup that we got recently was the IRB feedback saying you need to think about if students are reminded of things that are potentially distressing, you do need to connect them with some resources. Here's the campus counseling office, in case a student is reliving trauma from a conversation that we had. Maybe a parent or somebody close to them got really sick or ill or something like traumatic happened, and talking about their failure in that class reminds them of things that were happening at that time in their family that might be triggering. So that was something we talked a little bit about. And if there's potential for that, that's either it's probably a full IRB review. It might be expedited, but it's probably a full. My voice is about to give out, so I apologize for not hitting record. This is a shorter video than what would have been if I had press record, but that's the highlights of what we talked about. So apologize if it rambled a little bit, but you should be up to speed. And I also implore the folks to come chat with me if you want, talk about your project, see how it's going, even just checking in. Be happy to take a look at drafts and let you know that you're on the right path. So that's it for now. Thanks a bunch, and